Chag Sameach! Happy Passover! I'm Rabbi Barry Block, and I'm so happy to be able to lead a Seder with you. I hope that you'll follow along in the new Union Haggadah, newly revised, that with either a flip book or a Kindle or a hardcover if you have it. If you're using the Kindle or the flip book edition, you want to follow the page numbers that are actually on the page, at the bottom of the page, not what page of the Kindle it is or of the flip book. So it's wonderful to gather for Passover. Of course, I'm here by myself. You may be all by yourself or with a small group at your home. But wherever we are together because we're celebrating our festival of freedom all together at this season. And so I'm going to read everything that we need to read. I'm also going to stop and explain things and ask questions, though you're not there to answer. And when it comes to a time when everyone's supposed to read, I hope you'll join along wherever you are. We are on page 17, which is before the Seder, where the Seder begins. It says, before the meal. Now in the presence, however virtual, of loved ones and friends, before us the emblems of festive rejoicing, we gather for our sacred celebration with the household of Israel, our elders and young ones, linking and bonding the past with the future. We heed once again the divine call to service, living our story that is told for all people, whose shining conclusion is yet to unfold. We gather to observe Passover, as it is written, "You shall keep the feast of unleavened bread, the feast of matzah. For on this very day I brought your ancestors out of Egypt. You shall observe this day throughout your generations, a sacred remembrance of the day on which God freed you with a mighty hand." God of all generations, we welcome this festival of freedom with joyful hearts. We have assembled together seeking your presence. As you redeemed our ancestors from slavery in Egypt, so have you been our Redeemer and guide throughout the centuries. You have watched over us at all times. We are grateful that our lot has fallen in this blessed land dedicated to liberty and peace. May we be imbued with a deep sense of our duty as a free people. When we gather in our homes with our families and friends, may we ever be mindful of those who still dwell in poverty and deprivation, who still eat the bread of affliction. May the good tidings of redemption soon be heard in every land. May those who hunger for freedom and justice be satisfied, and may all people be blessed with the joys of harmony and peace. We now come to the part of the Seder known as Kadesh, sanctification. We declare this a great and holy day, first with the kindling of the festival lights. We praise you, God, the source of life. Let your light shine on us all. May our hearts and our homes be made brightest by the assurance of your love and sanctified by the sense of your presence. And now, I'll light the festival lights. Let us praise God, creator of the universe, who hallows our lives through laws and ethical teachings. We are mindful of these timeless values as we light the festival lights. May the festival lights we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, O God of freedom. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech העולם, אשר קישנו במצוותיו, וציוונו להדליק נר של יום טוב. In praising God, we say that all life is sacred. In kindling festive lights, we preserve life's sanctity. With every holy light we kindle, the world is brightened to a higher harmony. We praise you, God, majestic sovereign of all life, who hallows our lives with commandments and calls us to sanctify the festival lights. And we continue on page 21 with Shehechianu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. We give thanks to you, eternal God, creator of the universe, for giving us life, for sustaining us, and for enabling us to reach this day of joy. And we say, Amen. So the ancient rabbis devised the Seder as an act of tremendous creativity. You see, in the ancient temple, when the temple still stood in Jerusalem, Passover was celebrated with a meal, but it wasn't a Seder. It looked nothing like the Seder, and it involved the sacrifice of a lamb. And so once the Israelites no longer had a temple, it had been destroyed by the Romans in the year 70, the rabbis invented the Seder, created the Seder, as a way of preserving tradition and also as a way of innovating to fit their times. Here we are in an unwelcome time of a global pandemic. And we too have to innovate. As much as we would prefer to be all around the table together, so we'll have a virtual gathering for Passover this year. And we continue now with the Kiddush on page 22. One of the rules that the rabbis made for the Seder was that the Kiddush cup should always be full to overflowing. I filled my Kiddush cup before we get started, and you'll see that I will refill it consistently and urge you to do the same. And we lift up the cup. We're on page 22. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafein. We praise you, eternal God, creator of the universe, who has created the fruit of the vine. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol am v'romamanu mikol lashon v'kidshanu b'mitzvotav. ותיתן לנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה, מועדים לשמחה, חגים וזמנים לששון, את יום חג המצות הזה, זמן חירותנו, מקרא קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים, כי בנו בחרת, ואותנו קידשת, מכל העמים, מועדי קודשך, ושמחה וששון, הנחלתנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש ישראל, והזמנים. L'chaim, drink the first cup of wine. Or, in my case, grape juice, and as you see, as soon as you drink, it's time to refill the cup, because the cup should always be full at the Seder. The rabbis were preparing the Seder in a time of deprivation, a time like many in our country and around the world are suffering right now, a time of economic deprivation, a time when they were quite poor. And so the symbols of Passover were one time a year when the Israelites, or the Jews I should say, behaved as though they were wealthy, always with a full cup. We turn now to page 24 to our very generous appetizer for the Seder, karpas. So Passover might have originated even before it was linked to the story of liberation from bondage in Egypt as a springtime fertility ritual. And we have a few symbols on the Seder plate that are symbols of springtime fertility. One, of course, is the egg, which is a universal symbol of freedom, and there's a reason why not only Judaism but also Christianity has an egg as a symbol at this season because of the fertility rituals of spring that preceded either of our religions. And we take the greens, represented here by parsley, and we join together in the blessing on page 25. Before we eat the parsley, we're going to dip it in the salt water. The salt water is to remind us of the tears that our ancestors shed in Egyptian bondage. The blessing on page 25 together is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri ha'adamah. We praise you, eternal God, creator of the universe, who gives life to the fruits of the earth. Such a lovely appetizer. Okay, now we break the middle matzah. So I have a matzah cover here. It says on the cover, Lichvod Pesach, in honor of Pesach, in honor of Passover. And it has 3 slots for matzahs. And I'm going to take the middle matzah and I'm going to break it in half. And I'm going to conceal, which means to hide, part of it as the afikomen that will be shared later. We break the middle matzah, setting aside 1/2 as the afikomen. We will share this bread of affliction after the meal, even as our story has seen us from slavery into freedom. May it be a reminder to us of the importance of liberty, a signpost of our dedication to the end of bondage for all people. Halach ma'anya diachlu avatana ba'ar'ad d'Mitzrayim. Behold, this is the bread of affliction, which our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Let all who are hungry come and eat. Let all who are in want come and celebrate Passover with us. May it be God's will to redeem us from all trouble and servitude. Next year at this season, may the whole house of Israel and all God's children be free. And boy, doesn't that prayer ring true this year. So before I conceal the afikomen, before I hide it, I wanted to say a word about matzah as a symbol of Passover. So I think most of us know that it's the bread of freedom. It's the bread that our ancestors made when they didn't have time to let the bread rise as they were leaving Egyptian bondage in haste. It's also the bread of affliction because our ancestors did not have bread any better than this when they were slaves in Egypt. So it's interesting that it's a symbol both of slavery and of freedom. So now I'm going to set aside the afikomen to hide it a little bit later. And we continue now with the 4 questions. The 4 questions are on pages 28 and 29 of our Haggadah. And hopefully some young person at your Seder will be able to ask the 4 questions in Hebrew, or maybe you'll all sing them along with me in Hebrew, and then I'll read them in English. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot, mikol haleilot, shebechol haleilot anu ochlin chametz umatzah, chametz umatzah, halayla hazeh, kulo matzah, halayla hazeh, kulo matzah, shebechol haleilot אנו אוכלים שאר ירקות, שאר ירקות. הלילה הזה, מרור, מרור. הלילה הזה, מרור, מרור. שבכל הלילות איננו מקבילים אפילו פעם אחת, אפילו פעם אחת. הלילה הזה, שתף אמין. הלילה הזה, שתף אמין. שבכל הלילות אנו אוכלים בין יושבין ובין מסובין, בין יושבין ובין מסובין. הלילה הזה, כולנו מסובין. הלילה הזה, כולנו מסובין. The fourth question reminded me that I'm supposed to be leaning back, and that's why I have this reclining chair for leading the Seder. Why is this night different from all other nights? On all other nights, we eat either leavened or unleavened bread. Why on this night do we eat only unleavened bread? On all other nights, we eat all kinds of herbs. Why on this night do we especially eat bitter herbs? On all other nights, we do not dip herbs at all. Why on this night do we dip them in salt water and charoset? On all other nights, we eat without special festivities. And literally what it says is between sitting up and reclining. Why on this night do we hold this Seder service? And in Hebrew it says, why do we recline? Why are all of us declining? Avadim hayinu lefa'od Mitzrayim. The Haggadah continues without directly answering the four questions, but continues by telling the story of Passover. We celebrate tonight because we were Pharaoh's slaves in Egypt, and the eternal God delivered us with a mighty hand. Had not the Holy One, blessed be God, redeemed our people from Egypt, we, our children, and all the generations yet to come would have remained enslaved. Therefore, even if all of us were wise and well-versed in the Torah, it would still be our duty from year to year to tell the story of the deliverance from Egypt. Indeed, to dwell at length on it is accounted praiseworthy. So that's why many traditional Jews continue the Seder well past midnight. We are not going to do that unless you're starting this at 11:30. But we're not going to go on for hours and hours, but we are going to continue with the four children on page 30. By providing a fitting answer to the questions we are asking, our tradition explains the meaning of this night's celebration with the symbolism of the four children and their different responses to our observance. And while maybe nobody fits in exactly to the definitions of any one of the four children, the truth is that there's all kinds of different people and all kinds of different ways of learning. And so the Seder presents us with words, but also with symbols, with songs, with all sorts of different ways that we learn the story of our people and our redemption. The wise child is eager to learn and asks earnestly, what is the meaning of the testimonies, the statutes, and the ordinances that God has commanded us? To this child you shall reply, this service is held in order to worship our eternal God and share our gratitude for our deliverance and our freedom, that we may be happy and fulfilled in the days of our lives. The child whom tradition is called wicked is ambivalent and mocks everything we're doing. What do you mean by this service, the child asks. Since the question is you and not we, this child stands apart from the community. Therefore, we should respond, we do this because of what God did for us when we came out of Egypt. For all of us, even if this child had been present at the Exodus, the meaning of redemption would not have been understood. We hope to reach the alienated by inviting them to share in our celebration of liberation. The simple child indifferently asks, "What is all this about?" To this child you should simply reply, "We celebrate because with strength and love God brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." And for the child who is unable to ask, you shall explain the whole story of Passover, as it has been said, and you shall tell your children on that day, "This is because of what God did for me when I came forth out of Egypt." So now we enter the Magi, the telling of the story of our people in slavery and liberation from bondage, beginning on page 31. It is fitting for all of us, whether young or old, to consider how God's help has been our unfailing support through ages of trial and persecution. Ever since our ancestors Abraham and Sarah were called from the bondage of idolatry to the service of truth, God has been our guardian. For not in one country alone, nor in one age alone, have violent people risen up against us. But in every generation and in every land, tyrants have sought to destroy us. And the Holy One, blessed be God, has delivered us from their hands. The Torah tells us that when Jacob, our father, was a homeless wanderer, together with Leah and Rachel, he went down into Egypt. He and his family lived there, few in number. All the souls in his household numbered no more than 70. And Joseph, one of his 12 sons, was already in Egypt. He was governor over the land. Joseph welcomed his father along with his brothers, their wives, and their households, and gave them land as a possession, as Pharaoh had commanded. Israel dwelled in the region of Goshen, and they prospered and increased. After all of that generation died, a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us." And by the way, that is what anti-Semites say in every generation. There's too many Jews and they have too much power. Anti-Semitism is entirely based on a paranoid falsehood that Jews have tremendous numbers and a tremendous amount of power. And so Pharaoh may be the first recorded to say such a thing, and he continues, "Come, let us deal wisely with them, for otherwise they will continue to multiply. And if we go to war, they will join with our enemies and fight against us, and then depart from the land." Therefore Pharaoh set over them taskmasters to afflict them with burdens. The enslaved Israelites built great cities for Pharaoh. But the more the Egyptians oppressed them, the more they multiplied and spread abroad. The Egyptians indeed oppressed and afflicted us with cruel bondage, but we called upon God, the God of our people, who heard our cry and our affliction, our toil and our suffering. The cruelty of our oppressors brought suffering upon them and their people, as they were afflicted with plagues and punishments. And God brought us forth out of Egypt with a mighty hand and with an outstretched arm, with miraculous signs and wonders. Moses, Aaron, and Miriam were sent before us. God led our people forth with joy and singing, and guided them in the wilderness, as a shepherd cares for the flock. Pharaoh's armies pursued us, but we were delivered at the sea, whose waters parted for us to pass through. Therefore, we were commanded to observe this festival of Passover in this season from year to year for all time, that God's word of justice and freedom would be in our hearts, and that we would teach the memory of our deliverance to our children for all generations. And so we praise God as our liberated people did in these ancient days. Please join me. Micha mocha bailim Adonai, Mika mocha nedar bakodesh, Nora tehilot osefele, Adonai yimloch leolam The Torah recounts that when our people passed through the parted waters of the sea, in their flight from Egypt, Pharaoh's armies drowned as they pursued them. The heavenly host broke out in songs of jubilation. The angels were rejoicing. God silenced them and said, "My children are perishing. How can you sing praises?" Though we are the descendants of those redeemed from Egyptian cruelty, and have ourselves rejoiced to see oppressors overcome, yet our triumph is diminished by the sufferings of our enemies, also children of God. The wine in our cup of joy is lessened as we pour 10 drops, recalling the plagues that came upon Egypt. Our rabbis taught, the sword comes into the world because of justice delayed and justice denied. As we remember the consequences endured by those ruled by tyrants, both the oppressed and those complicit and silent, we each poured 10 drops from our cups. Our joy lessened both by the plagues that came upon Egypt and by those we bring upon ourselves in our own time. And so now we take our cups of wine and we diminish them by 10 drops. Now you have two choices about how to do this. You could take your spoon, if you have a spoon, and dip it in and take a bit out with each recitation of each plague, or you could use your finger. I use my finger. So here we go. We're on page 34. Dam, blood. Sfardea, frogs. Kini, lice. Arov, wild beasts. Devil, blight. Shrin, boils. Barad, hail. Arbe, locusts. Choshech, darkness. Makat b'chorot, the slaying of the firstborn. And then I wipe my hands off of a napkin. I don't want to lick off those plagues. But now I think just for a little fun, we'll sing my favorite plague song. One morning when Pharaoh woke in his bed, there were frogs on his bed and frogs on his head, frogs on his nose and frogs on his toes, frogs here, frogs there, frogs were jumping everywhere. Again, sing with me. One morning when Pharaoh awoke in his bed, there was frogs on his bed and frogs on his head, frogs on his nose and frogs on his toes, frogs here, frogs there, frogs were jumping everywhere. It's more fun if I could stand up and jump, but you wouldn't be able to see me. We are on to Dayenu, on the middle of page 35. As our story moves from slavery to freedom and from darkness to light, we now move from the memory of suffering to the joy of deliverance. As we recall the many ways in which our people have experienced victory and redemption throughout the ages, we proclaim, Dayenu! Any of those blessings alone would have been enough. So now, when it comes time, I want all of you at home, or wherever you are, to shout, Dayenu! How manifold are the wonders that God has granted us. Had God brought us out of Egypt and not divided the sea for us, Dayenu! Had God divided the sea and not permitted us to cross on dry land, Dayenu! Had God permitted us to cross the sea on dry land and not sustained us for 40 years in the desert, Dayenu! Had God sustained us for 40 years in the desert and not fed us with manna, Dayenu! Had God fed us with manna and not given us the Sabbath, Dayenu! Had God given us the Sabbath and not brought us to Mount Sinai, Dayenu! Had God brought us to Mount Sinai and not given us the Torah, Dayenu! Had God given us the Torah and not led us into the land of Israel, Dayenu! Had God led us into the land of Israel and not built for us the temple, Dayenu! Had God built for us the temple and not sent us prophets of truth, Dayenu! Had God sent us prophets of truth and not made us a free and holy people, Dayenu! And now sing with me. Ilu hotzi hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, Tzianu mimitzrayim dayenu. Everybody sing, dayenu, 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 dayenu. Ilu natan lanu et hashabat, natan lanu et hashabat dayenu, 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 dayenu. Ilu natan lanu et haTorah, natan lanu et haTorah dayenu. Everybody sing dayenu, 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 dayenu. Okay, now comes the part of the Seder where we describe all of the symbols of Passover. So I'm not going to do this by reading from the book for the most part. We have already talked about the greens and the matzah and the egg. Here we have the zro'ah, the shank bone. And this is a lamb shank, and it is roasted, and it is meant to remind us of the Paschal sacrifice. First of all, the very first Passover, when our Israelite ancestors were to slaughter a lamb and use the bone to dip in the blood and place the blood on the lintel and the doorposts, so the angel of death would pass over their homes during the plague of slaying the firstborn. And so then, ever after, in the land of Israel, as long as the temple stood, the Paschal lamb was sacrificed each year on Passover. We no longer have such a sacrifice, but the roasted shank bone reminds us of the roasted lamb that was the main piece of the Passover meal in ancient Israel. This, my friends, doesn't look a whole lot different from that shank bone, but this is a horseradish root. Horseradish does not naturally come in a jar. It grows as a root in the ground, and this is our bitter herb for the Seder, and we eat the bitter herb to remind us of the bitterness of slavery in Egypt. Okay, we talked about the salt water. The haroset. In a few minutes, we're going to taste the haroset. The haroset, by the way, different customs are from different parts of the world that use different things to make haroset. The unifying feature being that it's something sweet. My father, Gus Block, made this haroset. He always makes the haroset every year with apples and pecans and raisins and Manischewitz wine. So that is what is in my haroset. I'm eager to hear what is in yours. Now, there's a couple of symbols on the Seder plate that may be new to some people. There is an orange on our Seder plate. Now, there is a story, and it goes like this. The Professor Susanna Heschel was giving a lecture, and she was talking about the importance of women rabbis. And that some man stood up, and he said, a woman belongs on the bima about as much as an orange belongs on the Seder plate. Well, that would be a great story, except for one problem. Professor Heschel says it never happened. But you get the idea. The orange is on our Seder plate to say, look, there's a lot of people at our Seders today who might one day have been treated like they didn't belong. In fact, in some places, they might still be treated like they don't belong. Women, for one thing, as leaders in particular, Jews of color, gay, lesbian, transgender Jews, Jews by choice, you name it, or our non-Jewish spouses, people who are part of the Jewish community who aren't formally Jewish, and our friends who join us at the Seder. In any event, we put the orange right here on the Seder plate to say that everybody belongs, even if it's not traditional. There's also a cup of water. Now this is not my water glass so that I can drink water during the Seder. And actually, if you have a group, even like your immediate family, around your Seder table, it's best to start with an empty cup and then ask everybody to pour some from their water cup into the Miriam's cup. And I'm going to read about the Miriam's cup on page 40. Our tradition teaches that a miraculous well of water accompanied the Israelites on their journey from slavery to freedom, giving them water and sustaining them throughout the desert. It is said that this well existed because of Miriam, Moses' sister, whose spiritual values nourished the community of Israel, and that when she died, the waters of the well went dry. In honor of Miriam and all the Jewish women, mothers, daughters, and sisters, whose roles in the Passover story and its celebration throughout the ages have not been fully shared and honored, we place a cup of water, Miriam's cup, on our table. We continue on page 42. In every generation, each of us should regard ourselves as though we too were brought out of Egypt. Not our ancestors alone, but also us did the Eternal Holy One redeem. For not only in Egypt, but in many other lands have we groaned under the burden of affliction and suffered as victims of malice, ignorance, and fanaticism. This very night that we celebrate so calmly, safely, and joyfully in our homes, well, that's a hard line to swallow this year, isn't it? Was often turned into a night of anxiety and suffering for our people in former times. Cruel mobs were ready to rush upon them and to destroy their homes. But undauntedly, they clung to their faith in the ultimate and triumph of right and freedom. Sustained by hope, they marched from one Egypt into another, driven in hate from their homes, with their bundles on their shoulders and God in their hearts. On this night of memory, in the midst of our celebration of freedom, we remember the Shoah, our 6 million who died when madness ruled and evil dwelled on earth. We recall those whose names we remember and those whose very names are lost. We cherish the memory of those who died as martyrs, those who died resisting, and those who died in terror. We mourn for all that died with them, their goodness and their wisdom, which could have done so much to ennoble and enrich humanity. We mourn for the genius and the wit that died, the learning and the laughter that were lost. We stand in gratitude for the simple, decent lives of those who were the congregation of Israel. Their spiritual resistance remains as an enduring testimony to a community where light persisted in darkness. Each person was unique, and we remember them all in love and compassion. We revere and honor those of other faiths and people who had the courage to stand outside the mob, to save us and to suffer with us. They too are God's witnesses and a source of hope when we are tempted to despair. Because of our people's suffering, may such time never come again, and may their sacrifice not be in vain. In our daily fight against cruelty and prejudice, tyranny and persecution, remembering them gives us strength. Because God, the guardian of Israel, was revealed in that ancient watch night of the first Passover, and in our continued deliverance and survival in all the dark periods of our past, as the hope of the oppressed, we keep this as a watch night for all the children of Israel, dedicated to the promise of redemption. While blessed with the liberty of this land, let us also strive to make secure our spiritual freedom. As the delivered, we may become the deliverer, fulfilling our people's historic task of working for the liberation of all humanity from every form of tyranny and oppression. Let us give thanks to our God, who brought us and our ancestors from slavery to freedom, from sorrow to joy, from darkness to light. Together, we proclaim our praise. We continue with Hallel, Psalms of Praise, page 44. When Israel went forth from Egypt, B'tzid Yisrael, Mimitzrayim, Beit Yaakov, Leah Rachel, Be'am Loez, the house of Jacob and Leah and Rachel from a people of strange speech. Judah became God's Holy One, Israel God's dominion. The sea saw them and fled, Jordan ran backward. The mountains skipped like rams, the hills like young sheep. What alarms you, O sea, that you flee, O Jordan, that you run backward? You mountains that you skip like rams, you hills like young sheep. Tremble, O earth, at the presence of the Eternal, at the presence of the God of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, who turned the rock into a pool of water, the flinty rock into a fountain. All right, it's about time to eat, and we'll start with our matzah, with our bread, and our blessings over the meal. Let us praise the eternal God, creator of the universe, who has redeemed us and our ancestors from slavery, and has enabled us to observe this night of Passover, the feast of matzot, of unleavened bread. May we live to celebrate other festivals and holy seasons, rejoicing in God's blessings. May we work for the liberation of others, always striving to do God's will in the world. Let us fulfill our destiny to labor for the unity and harmony of all people, so that together we may all sing songs of praise and peace, redemption and deliverance. We praise you, O God, who blesses all people with freedom. And it's time for our second cup of wine. We have 4 cups of wine at the Seder because there are 4 times in the Torah in which God promises to redeem our Israelite ancestors from slavery in Egypt. Join me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. L'chaim. We praise you, eternal God, creator of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. Like I said, we keep our cups always full. And now we take the uppermost matzah and share it among all at the table. At my table right now, there's only me. And so the blessings are on page 46. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz chag sameach. We praise you, eternal God, creator of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat matzah. We praise you, eternal God, creator of the universe, who hallows us through laws and ethical teachings, who has ordained that we should eat unleavened bread. So eat the matzah. So, now you may have horseradish from the jar at your table to eat. I actually cut a little piece off of the horseradish root itself and eat it raw. And the blessing for the bitter herb, which we've already discussed what it's about. So we'll go straight to the blessing on page 47. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al achilat maror. We praise you, eternal God, creator of the universe, who hallows us through laws and ethical teachings, who has ordained that we should eat bitter herbs. That's some strong stuff. Now, Hillel said that the matzah of freedom should be eaten together with the maror, that the matzah and the maror should be eaten together. And that has evolved into a practice of a Hillel sandwich. So you saw my piece of maror in there with the harosas, with the harosat there. and they're to be eaten together because we can't really taste the sweetness of freedom without the bitterness of slavery. And do we ever know that right this year? We know what we're missing, not being able to be together with large families, at the congregational Seder, and all of those things. And we know we are eating the bitter herb right now. But let there be moments of sweetness this year on Passover as well. So now, eat your hard-boiled egg and enjoy your Passover meal, and put me on pause, and then unpause me when you're ready for the second part of the Seder, which I promise you is a lot shorter than the first. Welcome back. I hope you had a great dinner. And we are going to continue with a blessing after meals. I almost forgot the afikomen. I almost forgot the afikomen. The afikomen, you may find the afikomen, and here is your hint as to how to find the afikomen. Were any resolutions adopted by the Central Conference of American Rabbis in 2020? That's your hint. And if you follow that hint, you will find the afikomen, or any resolutions adopted by the Central Conference of American Rabbis in this year, 2020. So once you find that afikomen, everybody share it and enjoy. That's your dessert. Maybe you had some other dessert that was yummier than that. And we continue with the blessing after the meal. I'm going to do a shortened version of the blessing after meal that's not found in these Haggadahs, to a melody written by Noah Aronson. Brich rachamana, malkada alma, maredahai pita. Brich rachamana, malkada alma, maredahai pita. And that means let us bless the merciful one, the ruler of the universe, who has created the bread and all the food that we have enjoyed. We turn now to the third cup of wine, the bottom of page 57. We lift our Kiddush cups and we say, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, Borei peri hagafen l'chaim. We praise you, eternal our God, creator of the universe, who has created the fruit of the vine. And once more, I'll fill my Kiddush cup. And now, it's time to open the door for Elijah. Elijah, the prophet, is one person in the Bible who doesn't die. Instead, at the end of his life, Elijah is carried up into the heavens in a fiery chariot. And the rabbis ask, why? And they answer, because Elijah is supposed to return to us to tell us that the Messianic era is upon us. And so every year, as we celebrate Passover, which celebrates our time of redemption in the past, we hope for a time of more perfect redemption, a time of perfect peace. And this year in particular, we would add a time of no disease, a time of no economic uncertainty and dislocation. And so each and every one of us is responsible for helping to bring the Messianic era, a perfect time in the future. And so to symbolize that, I suggest that every person at your table put some of your wine or grape juice into the Kiddush cup Everybody pour some into Elijah's cup as we beckon Elijah. And now, if you'll come with me to the door, open the door for Elijah. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimhera v'yamenu, Yavo Eleinu, Imashiach ben David, Imashiach ben David, Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi. So now we turn to page 64 for one of my very favorite parts of the Seder, Who Knows One? And here's my challenge, and that is, after each question, who knows one, you don't have to repeat the question, but you answer it in one breath. So here I go. I will ask the question, then I'll breathe, then I'll answer the whole question in one breath. But hopefully you'll just put me on pause and you'll answer the question yourself. We're on page 64. Who knows one? I know one. One is the God of the world. Who knows two? I know two. Two tablets of the covenant. One God of the world. Who knows three? I know three. Three patriarchs. Two tablets of the covenant. One God of the world. Who knows four? I know four. Four mothers of Israel. Three patriarchs. Two tablets of the covenant. To one God of the world. Who knows five? I know five. Five books of Moses, four mothers of Israel, three patriarchs, two tablets of the covenant, one God of the world. I'm going to pause now to say, you know why they put this in the Seder? As a game, to be a diversion, and also as a way of teaching basic facts about Judaism. This isn't really related to the story of Passover. Who knows six? I know six. 6 days of creation, 5 books of Moses, 4 mothers of Israel, 3 patriarchs, 2 tablets of the covenant, 1 God of the world. Who knows 7? I know 7. 7 days of the week, 6 days of creation, 5 books of Moses, 4 mothers of Israel, 3 patriarchs, 2 tablets of the covenant, 1 God of the world. Who knows 8? I know 8. 8 lights of Hanukkah, 7 days of the week, 6 days of creation, 5 books of Moses, 4 mothers of Israel, 3 patriarchs, 2 tablets of the covenant, 1 God of the world. Who knows 9? I know 9. 9 festivals, 8 lights of Hanukkah, 7 days of the week, 6 days of creation, 5 books of Moses, 4 mothers of Israel, 3 patriarchs, 2 tablets of the covenant, 1 God of the world. Who knows 10? I know 10. 10 commandments, 9 festivals, 8 lights of Hanukkah, 7 days of the week, 6 days of creation, 5 books of Moses, 4 mothers of Israel, 3 patriarchs, 2 tablets of the covenant, 1 God of the world. Who knows 11? I know 11. 11 stars in Joseph's strings, 10 commandments, 9 festivals, 8 lights of Hanukkah, 7 days of the week, 6 days of creation, 5 books of Moses, 4 mothers of Israel, 3 patriarchs, 2 tablets of the covenant, 1 God of the world. Ooh, I've got 2 more to go, and I was out of breath that time. Who knows 12? I know 12. 12 tribes of Israel, 11 stars in Joseph's dream, 10 commandments, 9 festivals, 8 lights of Hanukkah, 7 days of the week, 6 days of creation, 5 books of Moses, 4 mothers of Israel, 3 patriarchs, 2 tablets of the covenant, 1 God of the world. Okay, here we go. Who knows 13? I know 13. 13 attributes of God, 12 tribes of Israel, 11 stars in Joseph's dream, 10 commandments, 9 festivals, 8 lights of Hanukkah, 7 days of the week, 6 days of creation, 5 books of Moses, 4 mothers of Israel, 3 patriarchs, 2 tablets of the covenant, 1 God of the world! I did it. I hope you did it too. Now we have the Passover nursery rhyme, Chad Gadya. Chad Gadya, an only kid, my father bought for 2 zuzim. It reminds us of the Paschal sacrifice that every family was supposed to have for its own home in the most ancient of days. And but it's also the whole nursery rhyme is an allegory. See if you figure it out. I'll give you a hint, which is that the kid stands for the children of Israel. And at the end, we'll talk about what the whole thing is probably standing for. So you'll sing with me, Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. An only kid, my father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came the cat and ate the kid my father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came the dog and bit the cat that ate the kid that my father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came the stick and beat the dog that bit the cat that ate the kid my father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came the fire and burned the stick that beat the dog that bit the cat that ate the kid my father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came the water and quenched the fire that burned the stick that beat the dog that bit the cat that ate the kid my father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came the ox and drank the water that quenched the fire that burned the stick that beat the dog that bit the cat that ate the kid my father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came the butcher and killed the ox and drank the water that quenched the fire that burned the stick that beat the dog that bit the cat that ate the kid my father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came the angel of death and slew the butcher that killed the ox that drank the water that quenched the fire that burned the stick that beat the dog that bit the cat that ate the kid my father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then came the Holy One, blessed be God, and destroyed the angel of death that slew the butcher, that killed the ox, that drank the water, that quenched the fire, that burned the stick, that beat the dog, that bit the cat, that ate the kid my father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. So the allegory is that the cat that ate the kid is Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian, who just conquered the Israelites. And then perhaps the dog is the Persians, who conquered the Babylonians. And then the stick is Alexander the Great, the Greeks that conquer the Babylonians. And the fire is the Romans, who conquer the Greeks, and so forth and so on, of all of the people who conquered one another, who ruled over the people of Israel. And then one day comes the angel of death and sees to the end of all of them, except the kid, except the children of Israel, and those who would join them, I would say. And then comes the Holy One, blessed be God, and destroys the angel of death. So there is no more death when the Messianic era arrives, and all live again forever in rejoicing in the ultimate redemption, for which we open the door to Elijah. So now we're ready for the conclusion of the Seder. I never refilled my cup after I gave some to Elijah, so let me do that now. I need to have a full cup for the 4th cup of wine. So we are on page 69. Our festive Seder is now completed. With songs and stories, symbols and foods, questions and answers, we have retold and relived the meaning of Passover. We have lifted up the cups, symbolizing the promises God made to our people so long ago. Promises of freedom and deliverance, liberation and redemption. As we now offer the blessing over the 4th and final cup, we again lift our spirits in faith and hope. May God, who broke Pharaoh's yoke, forever shatter all chains of oppression, and hasten the day when swords shall at last be broken and wars ended. Soon may the joyful message of hope be heard in all lands, so that humanity, liberated from violence and from evil, and united in an eternal covenant of unity, may celebrate the universal Passover in the name of our God, freedom. May God bless the whole house of Israel with freedom and keep us safe from danger everywhere. May God's light of love shine upon all people, dispelling the darkness of ignorance and prejudice. May God's blessing rest upon our country and render it a true home of liberty and justice. May there be peace among us and all people everywhere. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen. We praise you, eternal God, creator of the universe, who created the fruit of the vine. L'chaim. L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim. Next year, in a world of peace for Jerusalem and for all people. And we might also say, next year, may we be gathered around our Seder tables with family and friends, at our congregational Seder, with a congregation and with guests. May we never experience a Pesach like this one. May we find meaning even in this one. And yet, may our future Passover celebrations be enjoyed with family and community. L'shana haba'ah b'friyut, next year in health. L'shana haba'ah b'shalom, next year in peace. L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, the symbol of Messianic redemption. Amen. And Chag Sameach, everybody.